Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Deinfluencer. When I first read the synopsis to this movie, I remember just being somewhat, I remember just being uninterested at all, overall, I meant to say. And then I saw the trailer to the movie. And then once I saw the trailer, a lot of the perception that I had off the film that I just read on the synopsis alone had changed a lot for me because obviously now I have the visuals to put all the pieces together here. And then I became really intrigued with the direction of the story here. So then from that point on, I checked out the movie, which actually will be available as of tomorrow on the 6th on VOD, which I do recommend you guys check out because I have a feeling if anyone that comes across this movie, there are going to be a lot of opinions on the matters, whether it be positive or negatives, but I think there's going to be a lot of people's opinions that will come out that will share their thoughts on what the direction of the story is, because it certainly got me thinking that way as well, too, because honestly, I kind of anticipated more or less a straightforward horror film, which it is a horror movie, but the movie offers a lot more, in my opinion, that got me thinking about some of my own personal takes on how people use social media for the positive and the negative, of course. And this movie focuses on the aspect of social media influencers that are using their more or less of their influence to get people to do certain things for their own personal gain, which in a lot of ways can be viewed as a negative thing, depending on the circumstances, of course. But in this particular case here, with the influencer, who is the more or less the villain in this movie, he has kidnapped a young woman here who he is going to pretty much put through a series of events here to pretty much change her way of thinking, change her approach, if you will, when it comes to her use on social media. So I was debating on whether or not if I really want to delve into some aspects of the film in terms of the spoiler territory, because I noticed that when I started thinking about the movie, although I did enjoy the film, there were a lot of wonderful aspects of the movie that I did enjoy. I wasn't in love with the film at all. I liked the film a lot, but I didn't love the movie by any means, because there's certain things about the film that even at this point, if I'm thinking about the movie, get into my thoughts. I wrote some notes down here, but even then I was still writing some things down, and I noticed that more and more thoughts started coming out as far as my overall view of the film. And then I realized something, that this movie really got me thinking, which was something I did not expect at all. And I'm not bullshitting when I say that as well, too, because it really was something that I just did not anticipate. I was expecting more or less like a straightforward horror film, and where social media is a tool to be able to tell this horror movie, which it is, but there's a lot more substance to that, which I really did appreciate as well, too. So I will get into the plot synopsis, no spoilers, and of course I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. A young cheerleader and influencer is in prison and forced to take part in a social media challenges at the behest of her seemingly motivated kidnapper. She soon finds out she's fighting for her life as well as the lives of other young women. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie, as I mentioned before, this movie got me thinking a lot about what I just seen, because as I previously stated before, I was pretty much expecting a straightforward horror film. And again, this movie is a horror film per se, but I actually felt like there's a lot more to the story that made it more than a horror movie, if that makes any sense. I'm sure when you watch the film, you'll understand what I mean by that. But what I did appreciate about the movie was the fact that the characters that we follow in this film are pretty much the heartbeat and the soul of this whole film, because although it's nice to say that, you know, there are some psychological elements to this movie, because there definitely are, but it was really interesting for me to really take on, to watch this film and really be invested with the characters in terms of what their motivations were, why they're pursuing this path, if you will, and then seeing the conflicting sides as far as, you know, what the villain's motivation is, and then of course the captive, the young girl who's held hostage in Kelly, and them kind of clashing with each other because of their set of beliefs and whatever the case may be. And when I was watching the film, it was interesting for me to start thinking about my own personal take on social media as a whole, because, you know, I definitely have my opinions on the matter here. In fact, when I've actually talked about this particular subject when it came to the use of social media with various guests, I meant to say, that I've had on my show, You're So Cool, where I am a fan of it, but I'm not the biggest fan of it, because social media, although a wonderful tool, can certainly be used in a negative light, and depending on who it is, whoever's using it, for what reasons they're using it for, and of course the person's perception of viewing as far as what the posts are meant to be used as. So I remember I started thinking a lot about my own personal take on that and my own personal beliefs, which was fascinating for me to delve into in a film of this sort. And what I also did appreciate about this movie too is that the way that the film is put together, I think it's done quite well under the direction of Jamie Bailey, who also serves as a cinematographer to this movie and also the co-writer and the co-executive producer of this film. So this man has a lot his hands on various aspects of this production. And so it seems like to me that he pretty much had almost full control of this overall picture. And it definitely does show, because when you watch this movie, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this review, that this movie does have a lot of substance where you get to know the characters. And this movie runs around 90 minutes long. So there's a lot of time you get to spend with the characters through the dialogue, which is written, of course, by, or co-written in this case, by Jamie Bailey. Well, I thought it really did a good job in establishing what the characters' motivations are, including of the Deinfluencer, who is the, I guess, more or less the villain. But depending on who you ask, you may actually find some people who may completely agree with him, and you might some people who may agree with him or understand him, but just not agree with his approach. But the overall direction of the story is something that I was actually quite fascinated with as the film had progressed along the way. So when it came to the character interaction of this movie with the Deinfluencer, the young girl Kelly, and the other the other hostages, I meant to say, in this movie, there was something that was actually quite interesting about this film being more or less like a what you see is what you don't get, and not everything seems as what it appears to be. And then as the film has closed out, I remember halfway through the film, I've kind of figured out what was going on, and it turns out with what I had figured out was actually on point, which is one of the reasons why I kind of had a problem with the movie, which I'll kind of get into my negative without revealing any spoilers in this film. But despite that, even though I figured out what was going on in the halfway point, and then seeing how the film had ended, I was still very much interested in the overall story, in the direction of the characters, the dialogue, and really having some substance to connect with the characters that we're following in the movie, both the hero and the villain, more or less. So I got to give a lot of kudos to everyone involved in putting this film together, because this movie did get me thinking. Even after I'd seen the film, I was still thinking about how I wanted to articulate my thoughts to describe the movie and be able to share how I felt about the film. Because although I did like the movie, as I mentioned before, I didn't love the film. But I think this is one of those movies, at least for me personally, where I feel like going back and watching it again, there might be some things along the way that may change as far as my perception of the film and the direction of the story, that either could be for the better or for the worse. But I do have to go back and watch it to really have certain things sink in, because this was not something I anticipated at all when it came to the direction of the story here. So I think right now that'll be the best way to end my positives here, because there's certainly a lot more details that I want to delve into here, but that is going to be more into that spoiler territory. And I'm hoping that when you guys do watch the film, you'll understand what I mean by this here, because, you know, it's hard to say if this movie will strike up a conversation with anyone that watches it, but I do believe that this movie does have something so good to talk about when it comes to the use of social media, that it does bring up some important factors that the characters are more or less arguing about here. And whether you agree with them or not, but they do make some strong points that I think is necessary to really talk about in your everyday life for those who are really adamant about using social media as a way to be able to promote themselves and promote whatever they're trying to get out there. So there's certainly a lot of interesting tidbits that I think that came across with this movie that I've come to agree and disagree with here, mainly from my own personal take on it. But I understand the overall direction and the motivations for the character as far as why they did what they did, and whether you agree with them or not, that's for you to decide. But it was interesting for me to be in that position to watch the film and then question certain things along the way too, through my own beliefs that I've come across that I did not expect to have come out as I was watching the movie. So I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I hope you understand where I'm coming here. So that'll be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. So my first negative with this movie, as I mentioned before in the positives, that halfway through the film, I kind of figured out what was going on with certain events that occur in the film when it came to certain characters along the way, and the influencer himself, and of course the young girl who's being held captive. Something about the take on that story there, like I said before, I figured it out. And then when it had ended, knowing the way and seeing how the film had ended, it was one of those things where I would have appreciated a different take on that story to offer a fresher take on the I don't know. I can't figure out what's the best way to say this here, but I think what I'm really just trying to say at the end of the day is that I appreciated it, but I wish it could have been done differently. So I didn't have to predict what was coming towards the end of the film, because once it had happened, I was like, okay, I saw this a mile away, but because the story was still really good, I was still very much invested with the story. So that's my first major negative that came out for me personally. The second one here is that, unfortunately for me, now again, this is not to be dismissive towards the young actress who played the character of Kelly in the movie, because she was actually really, really good in the film, but I didn't find the character that interesting, because despite the fact that we understand where the character is coming from and we learn a little bit about their background with the exposition that we get in this movie, it was interesting. But I actually found the villain in this film, in this case, the Deinfluencer, be the most interesting out of all the characters that we get in this film, because once you start to learn a little bit about some of the rules and their arguments that they're making with the captive and amongst and the various other people that come across here as well, it's really interesting to hear the Deinfluencer's perspective on this move, on this mission that he's on. And what I also did appreciate about the movie too, and with this particular character, is that although some people might get the impression this is kind of like Jigsaw from social media, that's not really the case here at all. And when you watch the film, you'll truly understand what I mean by that. But I just thought it was rather unique what the characters take on this whole set of challenges that he's making these girls go through here. It was interesting for me to learn more about their background and understand the overall picture that you do get at the end of the movie. And I think that was a great thing about the film, but because you're meant to follow this character of Kelly in this movie, I think that was the least interesting part about the film that I just did not really connect with. I was more interested in about the direction that this guy was putting this young girl going through. I meant to say that felt a little unfulfilled for me personally. I don't know if it's the best way for me to describe it, because I'm still thinking about the film as I'm describing my negatives with this movie. But I just remember thinking, like, I found the villain to be more interesting, not the hero so much in this film. But I was still interested, despite the fact that I was uninterested in the various aspects of this character that we come to know in this movie. So I think that's the only thing I can really point out here as a major negative here for me. There is some other aspects of the film too that I can point out, but that is all in that spoiler territory, because the way that certain things are handled in the revelations in certain parts of the film, certain things worked for me and certain things did not work for me as well. So when you watch the movie, I'm hoping you understand what I mean by that, but that'll be the end for my negatives here for me. So now let's get into my rating. Now, I did like the film a lot, but I didn't love it, because despite the fact that I enjoyed various aspects of the film, I think I have to go back and watch the movie to really let certain things sink in, because it's weird for me to say that, but this movie, in my opinion, does require more than one viewing. Not for the entertainment aspect, because it's still an entertaining movie, at least for me personally it was. But there were still some things about the film that I felt like I just didn't necessarily click with all the way. And I think I came to that point and not clicking with it because a lot of my own personal beliefs about what the characters' motivations are didn't necessarily sync with me. So I think that was kind of the reason why I felt that I didn't love the film, or didn't like it as much as I could have liked it. But maybe upon repeat viewing, maybe my perception of that will change a little bit along the way. But I think there's still a discussion to be had with this film. And, the movie's still entertaining. So if you're just wanting to watch a film to be entertained for what these characters are going through, I still believe you'll get that with this film. But if you're also looking for a film that will get you thinking, despite the fact that some people may look at a horror film and say that horror films are just meant to be fun, you still will get that. But there's a lot more substance to this movie that got me reflecting on my own personal beliefs, that when I was watching the film, some of those emotional reactions started coming out, not because of the events that the characters are going through, but rather because of, like, I was starting to speak out in terms of, like, I don't agree with this character at all. I don't believe that's true. I think it's more like this. And I thought that was extremely fascinating for me to be invested in that respect of the storytelling that I just did not anticipate at all, as I've already mentioned before. So as far as my rating is concerned, because I only have a 4 rating system, I think in this case, a fifth one would have been useful to kind of more or less be in the middle ground for everything that I had just discussed here, because I'm still kind of in the middle about how much I liked the film and how much I didn't like the movie. So for the sake of the rating that I have right now, I'm going to say that this movie is still worth a shot. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, this movie will become available tomorrow on December 6th on VOD, which I do highly recommend you guys check out. You can either rent it or buy it, which I recommend you do both. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you've seen the movie in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the NRW. Make sure you share, like your videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there as well too. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts, on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and I have social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And that'll be it for me, these guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.